Howdy.
Thank you. So we're going to shift gears just a little bit in the nature of the next two presentations to close out this session before we have our workshop and conversation. So we've been hearing from scientists relating their research, and now we're going to hear from people who are doing different work in the space. The first speaker is someone that I'd like to call my friend, Max Makuvise from Zimbabwe. We met a few years ago, and I was immediately impressed when he introduced himself as a 22nd generation cattleman. I really like that in so many ways. So Max is here to talk to us about making smallholder farmers ecologically and economically viable and what modern technology and local ingenuity can achieve. Thank you very much, Max.
Thank you very much, Peter, for that introduction. The first thing I should say is, as he alluded to, I'm not a scientist. And as I always tell my staff, you should never be the smartest person in the room. I'm not. There are no slides and there are no stats for what I'm going to present. I'm just going to show a few pictures and talk about what we're doing in Africa. I'm very grateful to have been invited here today to speak at this conference with all of you esteemed people up at the front. Because I think it's quite important. The world tends to forget about Africa and sees us as a basket case ready for handouts and all those sorts of things. But I believe that we can make some sort of an impression on the planet and we can help with this whole issue. I'm glad that the science that's come out of the Lancet report has been debunked. I did have a little bit of fear going through me. I thought I was going to go on a personal crusade to go and accost Bill Gates somewhere and get him to change his mind, but it's not necessary. In Africa, cattle have various purposes. They're not used solely for beef. They're used for the bride price. When ladies get married, the son-in-law, the new son-in-law has to pay live cattle to the family he's marrying, whose daughter he's marrying. And it's a symbolic traditional thing that has been going on for years and years and years. Without cattle, that falls away. Africa also, we use cattle for a lot for draft power. You take away the cattle, suddenly people can't plow. We'll be back on your doorsteps asking for more money and more aid, if not infiltrating, flying over and becoming asylum seekers. And I don't think that's right for the planet. So I think moving on, I'm going to talk about Zimbabwe because that's where I seem to spend most of my life when I'm on an airplane or somewhere else. Sorry.
Use the keyboard.
Keyboard.
Or the mouse, whichever.
Keyboard. No.
Just try the mouse here. Just take the mouse. The left mouse.
Just click the left button. Oh, there you go. Right. Let's start with biodiversity. That's the part of the world you don't normally see, but that's just after the Victoria Falls, which separates Zambia and Zimbabwe. That's where the waters come off the falls, comes down. I have a good friend over there, Charlotte, who lives on the other side, and I'll tell you a bit about what she's doing as well a bit later. Just a brief overview, Zimbabwe is rich in biodiversity in its varied landscapes and aquatic ecosystems, having about 5,930 vascular plant species, of which 240 are endemic, 670 bird species, 270 mammal species, 156 reptile species, 120 amphibian species, 151 species. The land varies obviously from forest to savanna to desert, and there are 5 ecological zones. With such diverse ecological conditions, there's always room for cattle, which exist in all ecological zones. So just a bit of talk about Zimbabwe. Africa is very similar around the southern central parts, different biodiversity, but always room for cattle. One size fits all. A bit about this picture. This is real. This was taken on our ranch last year. If you think I'm lying, Holly, Alex, Pierre, and Rod were on the ranch, and they saw the elephants and the cattle as well. It was quite interesting to see a previous speaker talking about cattle and livestock together. We practice that on our ranch in Zimbabwe. We have 8,000 cattle, and at the moment we have 300 elephants, 600 giraffe, 3,000 or 4,000 impala, and a number of other species of antelope. So with the diversity that we have, what I'm trying to say is a one-size-fits-all policy doesn't work in Africa, especially in Zimbabwe. And what I'll do is I'll focus on cattle, which obviously there are two types, the Bos Indicus and the Bos Taurus, which you all know about. One of the biggest problems we have is that we have a lot of donor-funded projects because obviously we are reliant on a lot of aid from the world, but many of the projects have, through the agencies implementing them, worked on a one-size-fits-all basis. So what they're doing is they're saying, what we're doing in Kenya, we'll do exactly the same thing in South Africa or Zimbabwe or Botswana or Zambia. And that doesn't quite work. The reason for that is, for example, in Zimbabwe, one country, there are two main people/tribes who are broken even further down based on their location. And it's not possible to successfully implement a one-size-fits-all approach. But what's interesting is most of the reports coming from the donor projects say that these projects have all been successful. And unfortunately, I live there, I see it, and that's not true. And the reason for that is they lack one fundamental thing: data. I'll tell you a little bit about me. That's the sunset on the ranch. As I said, I'm no scientist. I'm an accountant who woke up one morning and went to work for an animal health company and decided I like cattle better than I like the numbers. Work for various organizations and own a few companies as well. In the animal health side, in the breeding of stud animals, running a large herd and a technology company, which I'll talk about a bit later. One of the things that struck me many years ago was in Africa, you have 90 to 95% of your cattle are in the smallholder sector. So they're held by smallholder farmers. And because of that, if you're going to improve livestock within Africa, mainly cattle, the only way you're going to be able to do that is improving the livelihoods of the farmers. Now, when we talk improving the livelihoods of the farmers, we're not talking about being missionary in our approach. We're talking about enabling them to commercialize their operations. And once they do that, they can then decide what they want to do with their money. We don't try and teach them to spend more money on protein, on eggs, or whatever it is. We tell them, you've got the money, you do with it as you please. So I had a bit of a Damascus moment, maybe one might call it, and converted to looking at smallholder farmers, but applying commercial techniques that I use in my daily life in the cattle operations that I run. So there are three types of farms in Zimbabwe. You have the commercial ranch. Unfortunately, that seems to be me. There's a bunch of Nguni bulls that we brought into the country in February to use in our herd as we move towards more indigenous type of animals. We're well structured, well organized, have funding. We can plan our operations based on the type of animal I wish to sell, whether it's steers or heifers. We have access to medicine and other inputs and the ability to plan ahead. Generally have a large say in how the market is run, even though we consist of less than 5% of the animals in the country. The next one is what I call organized communal farmers. These are the smallholders who are willing to learn. This picture was taken, Pierre was, I think he might actually be in the picture somewhere up there. If not, he's behind the camera at the other side. But these are farmers who are willing to learn, understand their cattle, and want to improve their livelihoods. What they need is guidance, advice, and not handouts. They also are quite organized and they share resources. As you can see, these handling facilities are communal, they use them all together. The last batch are these guys. And these are the guys who are a bit of a snag, a bit of a problem. They're very disorganized, mainly reliant on governments and donors for their well-being of their cattle and indeed their livelihoods. They don't have much skill in cattle rearing and do not see cattle as a source of income or economic asset. They're there because they have them, because they do. Birth rates are low, death rates are very high. In times of disease, they watch their cattle die. They'll watch it go from day one of illness to death. And these are the hardest group to change their values, to change their livelihoods. So I go to the group before, which is the organized communal farmer. And that's where we tend to focus most of our energies, in the hope that if you work with them, being very visual people in the rural areas, the others will copy and follow. So we talk about empowering farmers, the organized farmers. We talk to them, we sit with them, we educate them. Unfortunately, hierarchy is very important in Africa. So whenever we go out, we ensure that there's a government official present so that we're not seen to be being political. And they like to have a top table and sit in a high chair, unfortunately. But through education and training, we can help. In Africa, what we used to do was a lot of capacity building, whereby we would go into the farmers and tell them what they should be doing and how they should be doing it. But that's changed because Peter called me a 22nd generation cattle farmer. I was at a conference with him in Chicago, I think it was. And we had people coming on stage and saying, there's one gentleman from Ireland who said, oh, I'm a second generation cattle farmer, life is hard. We had another chap from Canada, I think it was, who said he's a fourth generation cattle farmer. And I turned around and I thought, what generation am I? And then I remembered my father was a boy herded cattle. My grandfather herded cattle. His father herded cattle. So I settled on the number 22. So it's in my genes. Anyway, so not doing things the way they did, I'm doing it commercially. But I think the important thing is not capacity building in terms of telling them what to do, but knowledge transfer. It's the new thing, new buzzword we're using down in Southern Africa. Knowledge transfer, indigenous knowledge systems. People have been farming for generations. What did they do? Why did they do it? Talk to the old, guys under a tree, or the guys that are 70, 80 years old. Understand what they did. Learn from them, because they can help us. It's not just about us handing information down. So once we get the farmers to understand the economic asset principle, they're likely to succeed. So it's all about the data. And I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the things that I'm doing and other people are doing in Africa. Data is the most important thing. In order to create solutions for small-scale farmers, data is going to be the most appropriate tool. What we find is, as I say with a lot of these projects, is no one actually knows. If you ask the Minister of Agriculture in Zimbabwe how many cattle there are, his number will vary between 5.4 and 5.6 million. And it has varied between that number for the past 20 years. There is no actual knowledge of what there actually is. So we need data gathering. The method should be simple. It's no point creating a system whereby you've got farmers having to go onto the internet, having to download data, having to upload data. They don't have it. At best, they'll have a smartphone. At worst, they'll have a feature phone, but they do have access to a phone. Then the next thing is, once you've gathered data, you have to analyze it. And it's going to be relevant. It's going to be farmer-centric. What does the farmer want to know? What does he need? Not sending statistics off to a central government office, which puts them in a drawer in their desks and doesn't do anything for them. And once you have analyzed the data, you need to disseminate it. Accurate and useful information must be given to the farmers, not just kept in offices. And like in the rest of the world, WhatsApp is a very powerful tool. I think I can safely say that every single person in Zimbabwe has access to WhatsApp, either on their own phone or access to a person within 100 meters of their house that has a phone. So there is the ability to disseminate the information. And again, it's not the usual M&E, business as usual, where the donors come and ask a few questions. How many eggs did you eat this morning? How many eggs did you eat before the project started, et cetera, et cetera. It's now about getting data to the farmers that is relevant to them. So talking about those tags, I'm going to talk about a company called eLivestock Global. And eLivestock Global is a little company that came about as a result of non-payment by government. We were supplying dip to the government for the communal dip tanks, and we weren't getting paid. And $9 million later, we said, why are you not paying us? And they said, it's because the farmers aren't paying them. So we said, okay, how can we create something that'll enable us to find out who's actually paying? And that's when we came up with this. And it's spiel from my partner, headquartered in the biotech corridor of Washington, DC area. eLivestock Global LLC aims to improve the livelihood of rural and commercial farmers, by enabling traceability of their cattle, focusing on cutting-edge affordable technologies. It delivers a world-class livestock traceability solution that can be applied globally. Enough of the marketing. Basically, it's about creating a system in Africa. One of the biggest things we tend to find happens is systems are created top-down for us. So the system is created for farmers in Wyoming, Colorado, and then they say you can buy the software in Africa and you can use it in Africa. Unfortunately, we can't. One of the things that MasterCard said to us is, if you can develop something in Zimbabwe, which is a hyperinflation economy, completely disorganized, the ability to move that into Wyoming is much easier than taking software from there and bring it down to us. We've piloted in Zimbabwe and we're moving it into other countries, but it's there to help rural farmers without them needing to actively use the system. Now that's an interesting part of it. It works both online and offline, obviously because of mobile communications. But what we're trying to do is create a system whereby a commercial farmer can use it, a rural farmer with money can use it, but a rural farmer who doesn't necessarily want to have the system must still be able to benefit from its existence. So in Africa, the other thing we have is aggregation points. We call them dip tanks, where once every 2 weeks in the dry season, once every week in the rainy season, these cattle all come to get dipped for tick control, because 65% of all cattle deaths in Zimbabwe are tick disease borne. So we need it for that. So we have aggregation for that. But it can also be used by large-scale commercial farmers. I use it on my commercial herds. I've got 8,000 head on the farm with the ranch, with the animals, with the elephants, 400 on the stud farm, about 200 kilometers. And with the insurance company we're working with, which I'll go into a bit later, a few thousand there as well. So talk about data uses. What do we use the data for? Disease surveillance. Because it's used on a mobile phone, GPS is enabled on that phone, you have the ability to know when an event takes place, how it takes place, and you can geolocate what's going on. Collateralization. You wouldn't believe how many people in Africa are unbanked. The reason they're unbanked is because they don't have access to collateral. They don't have access to funds. The reason they don't have access to funds from the banks is because of collateral. Now, there are laws in many African countries which allow cattle to be used as collateral. Unfortunately, the problem you face is if the animal cannot be traced, and it's not just having a tag in its ear, if it cannot be traced, the bank is going to say to me, if I lend you money, how do I know that next week when I go and lend farmer B down the road money, he'll have your animals. We'll just take them across and say, these are mine. So the banks are very skittish and they don't want to. But with a digital traceability system, there's collateralization. And with that, the farmer can borrow money. And with that, he can have skin in the game. And with that, he doesn't have to rely on government inputs or donor-funded projects. He can put his animal up, grow what he wants, and spend his money how he wants. Another thing is proof of ownership. That's a big one. There's a lot of times where people, the head of the household dies, for argument's sake, and his widow is left with 10, 15 cattle. And the husband's relatives come and take those cattle and say they're ours, they're our family's animals. Now, invariably what happens is they'll take them and the lady has no recourse to the law because they say, well, they belong to the family. But with the system, you have proof of ownership, proof that it's owned by Mr. A and Mrs. A. So when he passes away, she can lodge a case of theft against the family if they take them. Cattle censuses, I talked about the numbers. Again, geolocation is very important. We have 20% of the world's cattle on the African continent, but we have no skin in the game. All the exports are coming out of, wonderfully enough, countries like Ireland, who incidentally have a similar animal to farmer ratio as we have in Africa. Moving on, I think I've said all of that. Benefits to the farmer. I'm going to talk about another solution. 6 minutes, yeah. Another solution, the insurance industry. The insurance industry is rich in cash, but is always looking for assets. We designed a system for this company, and most of the insurance companies in Zimbabwe signed up to it. It's got prescribed asset status, so it's a legal investment that one can use instead of buying prescribed government bonds. Farmers obviously have the desire to save, but they fear erosion of their savings. And what we've done is we've created a model whereby, and it's run by insurance companies, I have no financial benefit from it in terms of equity or anything. And what we do is the insurance companies take $10 a month from each of their policyholders. And after 3 years, what basically happens is the farmer is entitled to a female that is ready to produce. He can either take that or reinvest. Every year he's given a statement. It's regulated by the pensions authority, so it's not a fly-by-night scheme. And after 5 years, the farmer gets a female and a calf. Okay. What does that benefit? We talk about inadequate genetics in Africa. This enables the insurance company through the farming community, commercial farming community, to start breeding more sound animals and then putting those genetics into the rural farmers on maturity. We've also got other schemes, which I haven't put a slide to, one called Opgenohuru, which is for the farmer to be able to diagnose these animals with illness and be able to contact an animal health official. That is part of our philanthropic division and will be handed out to the farmers free. And Charlotte across there from Zambia, we're talking to her because there's a novel scheme whereby we're looking at carbon credits. And the carbon credits for the rural farmers, rather than them going to the government, perhaps using part of those funds to settle their animal health bills. So the farmer never has to pay any animal health bills and he gets his full traceability. So that's basically it. I can go on, how far can we reach? I think the solution is very simple. Start small, gather data and expand, mushrooming out. I'm sorry. A little bit about Africa, sorry. Woman is still there. Like Ireland, I've said, we have lots of small herds, so it's good to get information from here. You know, we're talking about more food needed by 2050. We've got 20% of the world's animals sitting doing nothing, literally, just reproducing and dying. Our meat consumption is low. People, you know, we went to a function a few years ago before COVID, and there was a crowd of 2,000 people, and we asked the husbands. We said, "How many of you have actually slaughtered an animal, a cow, a steer, for your wife and family and eaten it?" Not one person put their hand up. We asked them, "How many of you have lost more than 5 cattle to death in the last year?" Every single man put his hand up. We have a problem which we can resolve through issues like this. In Africa, one of the biggest things I advocate for is, you know, if we've got the data, we don't need handouts. I think we need help, you know, teach us to fish, etc. The world has technological advances that we don't have yet. We're saying, share them with us. Give us a seat at the table. If we have 20% of the world's capital, why aren't we sitting at the table? Why are we suffering in the back of beyond, listening to people like Bill Gates saying people should stop eating meat, which incidentally, just as a side note, he was challenged on. And he eventually turned around and said, no, the Western world shouldn't eat meat, but in Africa, they should continue producing cattle, but using our genetics. I didn't know that Hereford was American, nor was the Angus, but hey, he's entitled to that opinion. Partnerships. You guys have done the work. You know, we haven't. Why should we reinvent the wheel when all we need to do is polish it? And with that, I say thank you very much, and I hope this has been informative to you.
Thank you very much, Max. Does anyone feel like they've just been introduced to something that they hadn't known before? Yeah. It isn't one world, context matters. We heard management matters earlier. All of these things should maybe help us think more broadly across some of these contexts. The idea that 20% of the world's cattle are existing without being part of the beef chain, but they are part of the accounting for beef's footprint. So that's an obvious place to make improvements in lowering footprint.